They called it paradise, the forbidden city. But inside its crimson walls, the only thing truly forbidden was freedom. Imagine a world wrapped in silk, perfumed with jasmine, and ruled by silence. A place where thousands of women waited not for love, but for a glance. A single nod from a man they would never truly know. And among them, somewhere between the scent of incense and the echo of golden footsteps, existed her, the forgotten concubine. She once had a name, but names fade fast in a palace where even the echoes bow to hierarchy. In this kingdom of perfection, she was a whisper, a painted shadow meant to please a god disguised as an emperor. And like every other forgotten soul in that gilded cage, her tragedy was not in dying, but in being ignored while still alive. To be chosen for the palace was considered an honor, or at least that's what the trembling mothers told their daughters as they pushed them through the vermilion gates. The truth, however, was simpler and far less poetic. The palace didn't choose women for their souls, but for their symmetry. A perfect curve of the neck, a soft eyelid, or the way her hair caught the morning light could decide her fate. And fate in this place was never kind. For every concubine who basked in imperial affection, 10 others withered in silence, dressed in beauty no one cared to notice. The emperor could have hundreds of wives, thousands of servants, and an empire to command, yet even his power couldn't buy him loyalty, only performance. Her mornings began long before dawn. Servants brushed her hair for hours, perfumed her robes, painted her lips the color of crushed roses, all for a man who had already forgotten she existed. Every gesture rehearsed, every smile calculated, every breath controlled, as though being flawless might summon the emperor's gaze again. But in a place where perfection was the bare minimum, she was invisible. The palace glittered with gold, but its silence was heavier than any chain. Even laughter was censored here, too loud, and it became a crime against grace, too soft, and it revealed despair. In her room, the walls were decorated with paintings of phoenixes, symbols of renewal, they said. Ironic, isn't it? The only thing that truly renewed in the Forbidden City was disappointment. She'd sit by the lacquered window, staring at the lotus ponds, waiting for a summons that never came. Time moved differently inside the palace. Days bled into years, and youth faded with the same indifference as candle wax melting on marble floors. The concubine learned that beauty, once her greatest weapon, was also her curse. For when it faded, so did she. And what a spectacle of irony it was. Outside, the empire bowed before the Son of Heaven. Inside, the women bowed before the illusion of being seen. The emperor's affection was a storm, brief, unpredictable, and often destructive. When he visited, the corridors came alive with whispers, incense smoke, and trembling hands. When he left, the silence that followed was more suffocating than death itself. The forgotten concubine stopped praying for his return. She began praying simply to be remembered. But the emperor's memory was like the seasons. Each visit a new spring, each departure a cold winter. Eventually, he forgot entirely that she had once existed. The palace was not a home. It was a theater of obedience. Every woman a performer, every glance a competition, every tear an act. The eunuchs patrolled the corridors like ghosts, their footsteps soft but their eyes sharp. They too were prisoners of proximity, close to power, yet forever excluded from it. Some pitied her, others envied her. After all, even being forgotten was a privilege compared to being nothing. She learned to speak less, to think quietly, to disappear gracefully. That was the unspoken art of survival in the Forbidden City, to vanish without making noise. Rumors were the only form of communication that truly thrived within those walls. They slithered between courtyards like invisible serpents, whispering about who had fallen from favor, who had been poisoned, and who had smiled at the wrong time. Each rumor was a small execution. And the forgotten concubine? She was spared from gossip, not because she was pure, but because she was irrelevant. The court had moved on, and she had become part of the furniture, ornamental, silent, and collecting dust. Once, she dared to write a poem. It was not about love, as one might expect, but about dust, the one thing that never left her side. She hid the poem inside a porcelain box beneath layers of silk, as if the act of writing it might awaken the gods' mercy. But the gods, much like emperors, have a peculiar sense of humor. They reward devotion with silence and punish vanity with invisibility. And so, her words remained unread, her beauty unseen, her existence unremembered. The irony, of course, was exquisite. The palace was built to preserve glory, yet it devoured the very people who gave it meaning. Each concubine arrived like a flower, radiant and fragrant, and left like a shadow. Their stories erased, their portraits destroyed, their graves unmarked. The Forbidden City was not a monument to love or power. It was a mausoleum of forgotten women, each one sacrificed to maintain the illusion of divine order. And still, the world outside called it paradise. Some nights, when the moonlight fell cold on her face, the forgotten concubine imagined herself standing beyond the palace walls. She pictured a world without ranks or titles, where laughter wasn't rehearsed and affection wasn't earned through silence. But even her imagination was censored by fear. Leaving the palace was treason. Dreaming of it was madness. So she learned to find freedom in smaller rebellions, a sigh too loud, a memory too sweet, a tear that refused to fall. Little victories, invisible to the empire, yet monumental to the soul. And then came the cruelest twist of all, death. Not her own, but his. The emperor, the celestial sun around whom their lives revolved, eventually set. His passing plunged the palace into mourning, though few truly mourned him. For the women he left behind, grief was mandatory, but relief was natural. New powers rose, new favorites were chosen, and the forgotten concubine found herself even more irrelevant than before. She was now a relic of a dead reign, trapped in the corridors of nostalgia and dust. The palace continued without her, as if she had never existed, which, in a way, she never truly had. Time, however, has a strange sense of justice. Centuries later, tourists would walk through the same corridors, marveling at the beauty of the architecture, the symmetry of the gardens, the perfection of the gold leaves. They would whisper about the mystery of the emperor's women, snapping photos where she once sat alone. None of them would know her name. None would imagine the silence, the fear, the invisible decay beneath the silk. They would call it history. She would call it captivity. It's tempting to think she might have found peace in the afterlife, freed at last from the tyranny of beauty. But perhaps the gods, in their eternal irony, placed her spirit back in those same walls to wander endlessly through the gardens she once longed to escape. A forgotten concubine, now a forgotten ghost. The perfect symbol of a world that worshipped perfection and discarded the human beneath it. So why is it a shame to be a forgotten concubine in the Forbidden Palace? Because it as the purest form of tragedy, to live surrounded by gold and die without ever being seen, to exist in a place built for immortality and leave no trace at all. The emperor's name would echo through centuries, carved in stone, sung in rituals. Hers would dissolve like smoke, lost between the breaths of history. And yet, if you listen closely, perhaps you can still hear her laughter, faint and fragile, hidden beneath the echoes of the palace, a quiet reminder that beauty, no matter how divine, is nothing without memory. In the end, she was both prisoner and poet, decoration and ghost, victim and accomplice. The world outside saw the Forbidden City as the heart of power, but within those walls, it was only a graveyard of forgotten glances and perfumed despair. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest joke of all. That the most magnificent palace ever built was never a home, only a stage. And she, the forgotten concubine, was just one of its silent performances, fading slowly under the weight of eternity. After all, even the most powerful empires crumble. But the silence of a forgotten woman, that lingers forever.